We have more audience members?
Thanks, Lamaya.
Okay, good morning. Welcome to the library. Today we kick off our spring event series, so it's very exciting, and our look at Ursula Le Guin's book, The Dispossessed, as our One Book, One College book continues. We are very lucky that we have an in-house expert, Tish Hayes, who's our information literacy librarian, who actually brought us the idea of using this book for the One Book and helped us develop these programs. So I said, well, if you're going to be instrumental in bringing the book and you're the expert, I think you need to do a talk. And so she has agreed to talk to us about Ursula Le Guin, about this book and other books that she's written. So Tish, thank you for being here and doing this, and I will turn it over to you.
Thanks. So I'm thrilled to be here to talk about one of my favorite writers, Ursula Le Guin. My name is Tish Hayes. I'm a librarian here. I have read a lot of Ursula Le Guin. I've read a lot of scholarship about her, but I want to be really clear that I am not a Le Guin scholar. I'm not really an expert, but I am a huge fan. And so that's really the perspective that I'm bringing to you today. And I wanted to do this talk to give you a little bit of an overview of Le Guin and her work, but also maybe as a little bit of an argument or present to you like my reasons for why she is such an extraordinary writer, thinker, and someone that I think is still relevant today, despite many of her works, many of her most popular works, really being written in the 60s and 70s. So let's get started. I want to begin and end with Ursula in her own words. So I have a couple of clips of Ursula at the end of her career. Getting get the name of this right, the acceptance speech for the National Book Foundation Medal for Distinguished Contribution to American Letters. So this speech was given in 2014. So this is just a short clip.
I think hard times are coming when we will be wanting the voices of writers who can see alternatives to how we live now and see through our fear-stricken society and its obsessive technologies to other ways of being, and even imagine some real grounds for hope. We will need writers who can remember freedom, poets, visionaries, the realists of a larger reality.
So that was just a short clip. And I wanted to start there because I think what she's talking about, writers who can see alternate futures, who can imagine bigger than where we are now, that can help us see differently, even in these hard times. She's asking and I think calling on writers to do that work, and she is very much a person who did that work throughout her life. So starting there, I thought we could do a little bit of background about Ursula herself, just a little bit of biography. She was born in 1929. She grew up in Berkeley, California. Her parents are significant because her father was an anthropologist, Alfred Kroeber, and he was a professor at University of California at Berkeley and was one of or maybe the primary person who recorded the last living Native American of a particular tribe that I did not write down. And because of that early work, became really renowned in his field, but also very attentive to like the native peoples and languages and like landscapes of California. And because of that academic background, he also was bringing, of course, all kinds of other academics into the home. Ursula grew up surrounded by academics and people who were constantly talking about the sciences and the arts, asking big questions. So she, at a very early age, learned to engage in that world. Her mother also had a graduate degree in psychology, but was a writer, and so was the one who actually wrote about the Ishi, who was the Native American that her father had this long relationship with. And so inherited a lot of that writing experience and technique and just perspective from her mother. And so she grew up in Berkeley, but then they would spend summers in Napa Valley. So like very entrenched in California history. And while she was like growing up, engaged with all of these like landscapes and experiences, she had these 3 brothers that she also, was constantly like connecting with. So that all had a big impact on who she became, and we'll see that a little bit in some of her work as we go. She went to college, did graduate work, she got married, had 3 kids, and all during this time, she is writing. And she talked in an interview about how she had been writing since her youth. She submitted, I think, her first story for publication. It did not get published, but she first submitted it when she was 11 years old. She always thought of herself as a writer. People would often ask her, like, when did you start writing, or when did you think of yourself as a writer? And it was all, like, from her very earliest ages, that was a part of who she was. But she is living her life and writing, and she's trying to get published, but at the time, in the 50s, 60s, as a female writer, was having just hitting a lot of barriers. So it's not until 1959 that her first work is published. It's a poem. And then she finally gets her first short story published in the first published novel in 1966. And Rockcannon's World is the first book that's in this universe that The Dispossessed and The Left Hand of Darkness are a part of. So she's already, I think that makes her 37. So she, despite being writing all of this time, it's not until after having kids, doing this work for a long time, that she actually gets published. And then she has a very long career. She never stops writing, she never stops publishing. We're gonna look at just the numbers of her works and awards in just a moment, but she's continually working. Her final novel, Lavinia, was published in 2008, but she just kept writing. So lots of essays that were published. She started a blog in the 2010s. That was where people were writing at the time and where people were publishing. And so she had her own blog where she kept up writing, I think, basically up until the very end. And then died peacefully at home in 2018. Kind of a magical life. So let's take a look. Just quickly, she wrote 23 novels, so many short stories, poetry, essays, and those are being published often in sci-fi fantasy magazines and collected in different editions. And then throughout her career, she's winning awards. The Hugo, Nebula, and Locus Awards are just huge science fiction awards. She also was awarded a number of literary awards, some things that are not even included in here. So she was an extraordinary, well-honored person in her lifetime. So let's go back to where it really started. So in 1968, she publishes A Wizard of Earthsea. And this is really the beginning of her kind of rise to fame and kind of the thing that will anchor her fans for the rest of her career. So in 1968, she publishes this novel. It's a young adult novel, fantasy, about a young boy who discovers that he has these powers. He is mentored by a wizard on the island that he lives on, and then goes off to wizard school. And at wizard school, he becomes a wizard. He learns the true names of things, which is where the power is situated in this world, and is off to this grand start. But, of course, he is young, he's full of power, and he makes a pretty big mistake. And because of that mistake, creates a shadow in the world. And so throughout the rest of the book, he has to figure out what to do about this shadow that at some point begins to hunt him down. So it's very dramatic. It follows his journey from this young boy through like finding the shadow and figuring out what to do about it. The themes that come up in Wizard of Earthsea will be echoed throughout Le Guin's work, throughout her life. So we have the power of names and naming. That is the root of all power in the Earthsea world. It also speaks to balance and equilibrium in magic. One of the quotes that one of the wizards says to Ged, the young boy, is that to light a candle is to cast a shadow. So all magic has to stay within an equilibrium, and that taking responsibility and facing one's inner demons is maybe the greatest work that we can do. So just in this short quote, to change this rock into a jewel, you must change its true name. And to do that, my son, even to so small a scrap of the world is to change the world. So you can see like two of those things just in this like really short sentence. And that I think is one of the things that I find really extraordinary about Le Guin. She builds really big worlds, but she also takes real care in her language and in the way she is sharing with you and communicating with you what that world is and what the philosophy is. So even in this small sentence, we get like almost a summary of the book. So beautiful. This is a map of Earthsea. So Wizard of Earthsea comes out in 1968. Le Guin talks a lot about like the process of creating the Wizard of Earthsea, and that it didn't start with the story of Ged, but instead started with this map that she started sketching. So she starts creating kind of this archipelago of islands and starts to imagine who lives there, what kinds of societies, what kinds of magic would emerge from a place like this. And it's through this map and through thinking through who exists in this world that she comes to a Wizard of Earthsea. So the original series starts with Wizard of Earthsea, then the Tombs of Atuan in 1970, and then The Farthest Shore in 1972. And for a long time, this trilogy is really like the place where people go and like how Le Guin's name is thought of, is connected to this trilogy. Okay. And then, that's her fantasy. I feel like people often think of fantasy and sci-fi as very different things. Like if you're a fantasy writer, you only write fantasy. A sci-fi writer only writes sci-fi. And Le Guin did all of it, sometimes merging them. She was ahead of her time. But her science fiction really got started with The Left Hand of Darkness. And this is the other thing that put her on the map. These two came out within a year of each other. This was published in 1969. It won the Hugo and the Nebula that year. And it's also set in the same universe as Rakkanen's World and The Dispossessed. So this quote, consider there is no division of humanity into strong and weak halves, protective, protected, dominant, submissive, owner, chattel, active, passive. In fact, the whole tendency to dualism that pervades human thinking may be found to be lessened or changed on winter. So The Left Hand of Darkness is really an exploration of gender. Winter, which is the planet where most of the book takes place, is populated by like all of the people on Gethin are ambisexual, so there's no fixed sex. Most of the time, they just exist without gender. And then for periods of mating, childbearing, they will form different genders. And that will change throughout their lifetime. So those things are in flux And so a human that's more like us, a Terran, which is in this universe the word for Earth, goes to, like as an envoy, to do some sort of diplomatic mission to Winter, and spends a lot of time with a Gethin. And most of the book is them trying to understand each other and like make sense of these two perspectives that feel impossible to figure out. And it really was Le Guin's way of thinking through what it meant to live in a gendered body, to live in a gendered society, and what it might be like if you did not have to do those things, if those social structures were different, were broken, were changed. And this, I feel like those ideas don't feel new now, but at the time it like blew people's minds. People were like, oh my God, what? How could this even be? So she gets a lot of credit for bringing these conversations into like the public sphere, into science fiction spheres. She also gets a lot of pushback, and we'll talk about that in a minute, because her imagination is limited around this issue as well. But at the time, very transformative. Again, won multiple awards. Okay, and then the other book that really, again, put her on the map, it's the one that we're doing as our one book, is The Dispossessed. And I wanted to talk about it because I think it, like the other two, really demonstrates something that Le Guin talked about a lot in the way she approached her writing and the way she imagined worlds, is that a lot of her fiction began as a thought experiment. Like, what would it be like? Like, what could we do if? And then she let that dominate and like lead her to the conclusion that if she played it out, like it would come to. So she was really willing to ask questions that were complicated and play with answers that might not be a common answer or an easy answer. The Dispossessed really it's a lot of things, but it began as sort of a thought experiment around anarchism. She could not think of any anarchist utopias, and so she decided she wanted to figure out, like, well, what would that look like? And so as she's creating that, inevitably, like, problems crop up. Utopias are difficult to create when you have humans who are less than perfect. But she wanted to figure out what it would look like. I love The Dispossessed, and I've read all three of these novels multiple times, and it would be hard for me to say a favorite. But one of the things that I really loved about The Dispossessed, I think, ties into this idea of a thought experiment and being willing to push past any like preconceived ideas about what you might find. The worlds that she sets up in The Dispossessed are two kind of opposing perspectives. One is an anarchist utopia. The other is a capitalist society. Some people might think of it as a utopia, but very much like our own, with the problems of capitalism and power structures that we see in our own society. And the main character is really torn between these two worlds, because they both offer something to him that he finds valuable. And in like the most important moment in the book, when he has to make a decision, like what does he do with this great discovery that he has? Does he give it to Anaris? Does he give it to Urus, these two planets? He figures out this other way. He realizes that he's not stuck in a, I just lost the word. He's just not stuck. That there is more than these two options, that there are other ways to think about like his next steps. And I think that the freedom that we want often in life really is tied to like understanding that there are multiple options. There are many ways to think about a problem, and that it may just take some courage to get past the things that are already presented to us. So these are the three like books that really put Ursula Le Guin on the map. They're the books that people are still reading. I don't think any of most of her books, most of her works have not gone out of print. And The Dispossessed was published in 1974. So we have 1968 for Wizard of Earthsea, 1969 for Left Hand of Darkness, and then 1974, The Dispossessed. And that wins the Hugo, the Locus, and the Nebula winner. So 3 huge sci-fi prizes. Okay. So she could have, at this point, just been like, all right, I'm famous, or I'm a famous writer. And these could be just the things that she's remembered for. But she doesn't stop writing. She keeps writing. And she not only keeps writing, but she continues to think and engage with the work that she's already created. So Left Hand of Darkness, as I mentioned earlier, was this thought experiment about gender and what gender means and how it shows up and like what would it be to like get rid of all of those expectations of gender, the societal pressures of gender, and people loved it, except for the people who didn't. So at the time, 1969, the second wave feminist movement is beginning, and the feminists and other feminist sci-fi writers took some issues with the way she presents gender in The Left Hand of Darkness. And multiple writers call her out for the way she uses pronouns. So maybe you've experienced this in writing classes for a long time. He is just the default, right? Like he is universal. And so Ursula, especially in the time that she was writing, like just use that. So whenever there was someone who is supposed to not have a gender, she would just default to the human pronoun he. And feminists were like, why couldn't you imagine? You imagine this whole world. Why couldn't you imagine something else? And then the other thing that she really got stuck in, again, like she imagines this whole world, but really like the relationships were only heterosexual. So all of the like intimate relationships that she imagines, and I think even some of the perspectives are pretty homophobic. And so people push back, as they should. And in 1976, I think there was like going to be a republication, or I think it was originally published in a magazine. She publishes this essay called Is Gender Necessary?, where she talks about the choices that she makes in The Left Hand of Darkness. And at the time, she's still a little defensive. She's like, I made these decisions for a reason, like this is where I was at. This is why I believe these were the best decisions at the time. And she, doubles down on The Left Hand of Darkness and the way it was written. And she talks about this, about how for her, like the feminist movement, although became really important to her, at the time she was raising 3 kids, she was married, like it was happening sort of elsewhere. And so that's the stance that she takes. And then over the next decade, her life expands. She continues to engage with these writers who have challenged her. She continues to engage with the world. There's a lot of social justice movements and political movements that she was a part of. And so in 1988, in a new essay collection, Dancing at the Edge of the World, she publishes Is Gender Necessary? The Redux, where she comments throughout on her essay, pointing out all the ways in which she was wrong. And so I think it's a really powerful message, something that, and I think it's one of the first examples of why she is an extraordinary thinker, is that she wasn't going to just let this essay sit. She was going to continue to engage and be really open about that engagement and be really honest about where she got things wrong. In an essay about these 2 essays, the writer Marianne Mohanraj says that in writing about a piece of her own work that was criticized, she says, "I was sorely tempted to take the story down from my website, to try to erase it from the visible world. It is frequently embarrassing to realize just how wrong you were. But with Le Guin as a model, I left it up, bracketed with an explanation of where I thought I had gone wrong." And so just an example of the impact Le Guin has had beyond just her writing, but the way her thinking has changed other writers, other people, and can be a model for us in these times. Another place where Le Guin shows us how to maybe keep engaging with ideas beyond like their initial conception is in the last 3 books of the Earthsea trilogy, or series. So she originally writes that trilogy in the 60s and 70s. The entire focus is, for the most part, on Ged, on the wizard powers, the power of names. And she, again, gets a lot of criticism in the 70s from feminists who are, and like lots of other people, like why is the focus on these wizards? Why is the power only rooted in like this masculinity? And 20 years go by, and she, this has all just kind of been sitting in her brain, and she ends up writing Tehanu in 1990, which presents an aging hero, or an aging Ged, and then the hero Tehanu is a smaller character from one of her earlier books. But it really shows us the way women's work functions in the society, and that magic isn't solely doesn't solely belong to men, but also women, and the way that shows differently, and how injustice in that society also has shaped the way women practice both their magic and their relationships. And then once she creates Tehanu, another decade passes, and she just keeps coming back to this world, because once she discovers this other power, these other characters, they start to play out in her mind and create this bigger world. So if you start A Wizard of Earthsea and move all the way to The Other Wind, which is the final novel, you have an extraordinarily huge world. Just the perspective. I mean, it was really fun. The first 3 novels are very fun, totally enjoyable, absolutely worth reading. But these other 3 books massively expand that world. And I feel like it's this message, I keep doing that. It's this message that we don't need to just see our universe or our world in this one way, that there's so much beyond what might at first be visible to us. And I love that she does that both for the reader but also other writers. Makes it possible to expand our vision and expand our views. So Le Guin, again, I think clearly is in conversation with herself, and is listening to the people who are critiquing and criticizing, at least the ones who are doing it in good faith. And so she's doing that in her fiction and her writing and the worlds that she creates. But she's also doing that in her relationships with her friends, with other writers, with the city that she loves. She lived in Portland until she died. She was a passionate lover of that city. And in this book, Loving Corrections, Adrienne Maree Brown has a chapter devoted to Ursula Le Guin and the letters that she wrote and the work that she did in those letters. So I want to read just a quick quote from Adrienne about Le Guin. She says, "Le Guin was also someone who aimed to challenge everything about the world we live in, using fiction to do that work. As I plumbed her archives, I saw that she deployed her letter writing in the same way." So I wanted to share with you, these are very short letters, but I feel like it's such a good example of someone being deeply engaged in the world and willing to just the way she was challenged, challenge other people to be better, and challenge herself to be better. So she writes to Philip K. Dick, who, famous science fiction writer. She says, "Dear Phil, okay, right. God knows I have never wakened, only dreamed, or been dreamed, or whatever. And I don't care if you're crazy or crazy like a fox or the sanest man in California or all three. With a great artist, these distinctions are irrelevant. A real artist, and that you are. I know that much. But I get scared by your recent books and stories, and especially Valis, because it seems like you hate women now. And the part of you that is woman is denied and despised. It's all yang and no yin, all heaven and no earth, all word and no matter. And I'm not at home there. I'm shut out. I can no longer follow your art, which has been such a joy and solace to me. But I keep trying. Love, Ursula." Like, that letter is so extraordinary. It's so short. And she's telling Philip K. Dick, like, in no uncertain terms, like, I have a problem with what you're doing and how you're writing. But also, like, I'm doing it because you mean something to me, and your writing's important. And I'm going to keep trying to be engaged with you. And like Adrienne Marine Brown's, this whole book is really about, like, how do we call in our friends? How do we help people become better versions of themselves? And I feel like that is such a good example of being engaged in that way. And then she also does that for herself. So quickly, in an undated letter on the success of Harry Potter. And she got a lot of Harry Potter comparisons. So this is what she says. "I will read Harry Potter when I get old enough to outgrow the soreness that all the praise and hype caused my silly ego. People kept rushing at me and shouting, 'Oh, have you read this wonderful original book about a school for wizards? Isn't that a great idea?' And what was I to say? I said, yes, I thought so too, politely. But sometimes I lost my temper and said, yes, I thought so too when I made it up. And then I felt mean and pusillanimous. I hate envy, or is it jealousy? Anyway, I will grow up eventually, maybe at 75. So again, poking fun at herself for being a little jealous and acknowledging that. I feel like both symbolize so much of what shows up in her fiction. Both a willingness to call out someone else, but also herself. And then we have Ursula Le Guin, who is, I think we can sort of think of this as her legacy, is that not only was she engaged with other people and other writers, but other writers are engaged with her and her work. So The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas is a story that is taught, I think, often in high school and college English classes. It's a story about a society that is like essentially a utopia. Everything is beautiful, everyone's happy, it's such a good time. No one is in pain, no one's poor. And the story goes on about like how incredible everything is. And then you realize, and every person in the society realizes, maybe on their like 13th or 16th birthday, that all of that happiness is because there's one child shut in a basement that's like tortured. So all of that happiness is predicated on this one child's misery. And lots of people then just go back to their lives like, oh, well, I guess that's the price. And then some people walk away from Omelas. And the way people engage with that story, like there's so, again, it's Ursula's setting up some questions for us to think through and talk through. And one of those responses comes from N.K. Jemisin, who is an extraordinary science fiction writer in her own right. We have some of her books on the back shelves over there, and there is a story that she wrote called The Ones Who Stay and Fight. And it's her response to the story that Ursula K. Le Guin sets up. And one of the things that she says, she said this in an interview from Paris Review, that the thing I've always loved about Le Guin's story is that she kind of gut punches you with the fact that this is the reality of living in a modern capitalist society. You're living at the expense of, amid the pain of, a lot of people who have suffered to bring you the wonderful lifestyle that you've got. But Jemison's response is, no, like, you don't walk away, you have to fix it. Like, something has to happen. Like, that's not a legitimate response to, like, finding the girl in the basement. And so she writes it in her short story, and she says that the other thing that she was trying to figure out is, like, what a society might be like if it was genuinely a good place. And she realized as she was trying to think of it, science fiction writers are supposed to be able to come up with futures, all futures. So again, just another way that Ursula Le Guin has impacted so many writers is, I think, her both willingness and her work being something that can be engaged with. That it's not something that's static, that needs to be precious or unchallenged. Le Guin herself was willing to be challenged and changed, and her work is here for us to do that as well. Again, thinking about Le Guin's legacy, after, I think this was published in 2019, 2020, this is a collection of short stories in tribute to Ursula K. Le Guin, all like Portland-based writers who are all imagining things about that city and her future. And the quote here is really just a reminder about like that impact that Le Guin has had. She never inspired others to write like her. She inspired them to find their own imaginative powers. And I feel like that is just a mark of such an important, I feel like that says so much about who she was and the kind of author that she is. And then in 2022, the Ursula K. Le Guin Prize for Fiction was established. So another piece of Le Guin's legacy. She died in 2018, but her website, her estate continues to provide support for writers doing this kind of extraordinary imaginative work, imagining other futures. So this is the winner for 2025, but the winners for the last few years are on the website. And the shortlist for this prize, it's just a great place to start if you're looking for other fiction to help you imagine other futures, all extraordinary. And just an example of her legacy and the work that she has done. Okay, and so now we're coming to where I wanted to wrap things up. There's a famous quote that makes its way around the internet quite a bit, and I wanted you to hear it in her own words and talk about it a little bit.
We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable. So did the divine right kings. Any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings. Resistance and change often begin in art, and very often in our art, the art of words.
So that quote, again, travels the internet quite a bit. And every time I read it, like chills, I get chills. Because I think what she is saying is less about people often use it as like a refute of capitalism. But like what she is saying is that all of this we imagined as a society. We've made up this world. And so if we want a different world, if we want things to be different, then absolutely, we can do it. We can figure out like what we want this world to be and make that happen. And that is not, we're not powerless. And it's just extraordinary. And I think when I feel maybe my most frustrated with things that are happening, that quote, reading her work, reading other people's work who imagine worlds that are bigger, different, better, can be so powerful and so important. So I hope that I've convinced some of you to either read a little bit of her or just read a science fiction novel, something that might help expand the way you think about the world around you, or be deeply engaged with your community, with a writer that you love, something that will challenge you and challenge the other people in your life. So if you want more of Le Guin, we have an excellent video on Hoopla. Highly recommend it. You get lots of good images of her in her younger years, and we'll learn about her life. I have some books up here if you want to grab something to read for later, and just appreciate your time. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them now. Thank you.
I'm coming with the microphone.
Okay, so you mentioned as a fan, you can't really pick a favorite.
Yeah.
But can you suggest a starting point for someone who's new to her?
Yes. I think there's a couple of spots. If you are someone who reads fantasy and prefers magic and wizards and dragons and things like that, I would absolutely start with The Wizard of Earthsea. It is a pleasure. It's really fun. It's maybe the first thing I read by her. And I was just, I think, taken by it was how fun it was. And then if you are a sci-fi reader, I would actually start with either The Left Hand of Darkness or maybe The Dispossessed. And then if you're someone who's not really a sci-fi or fantasy fan, there's actually a ton of her work that is not sci-fi or fantasy. And there's a book called The Sea Road, which I don't have displayed up here, but it's a collection of short stories, and it's beautiful. A lot of it's writing about a coastal city, lots of just relationship stuff, and that's really beautiful, and highly recommend that as well.
Can I ask about The Left Hand of Darkness?
Yeah.
So if we dove in, if that was a starting point, you'd mentioned some of the criticism and some of her
Yeah.
own evolution. And I guess it's an example of there's all kinds of novels that are great novels that maybe haven't aged in terms of
Oh, sure.
how we think about topics today from where it was at the time. How should we go in with that? I guess hearing you talk about it, I'm prepared, but what should we think about as we're reading this, and kind of how do we take it and understand where she was and maybe where she wanted us to be?
Right. I mean, I think starting with that essay, and maybe reading that as an introduction, the gender necessary redux, so that you have a sense of her thinking about it. But I think too, just recognizing that when it was written, that maybe some of the language isn't going to match the way we think about gender even, and like the pronouns or sexualities. But I do think that there's enough there about politics and relationships and being it's still going to be really, really good. So I think it's balancing what we know and maybe what we understand about gender differently in 2026. But I think it's still an okay spot to start. Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions? All right, how about a round of applause? Thank you, Tish.
Thank you. Thank you, Lamaya.
That was good, Thank you.
Thanks for coming.